Here we go. Okay, thank you for joining me again. We're doing Gemara Yuma, as you know. We're on page 10a, Daf Yud Amud Aleph. The Gemara we're doing is creepily topical. The Gemara will examine whether at the end of days, the confrontation between the two great world powers, Iran and United States, which one will come out on top? That's how you can possibly interpret the Gemara that we're about to tackle today. In the old days, it would have been Persia and Rome. But if you say that Persia is taken by the position of Iran today and Rome by the Western world, Christianity, particularly the United States, then we're going to be examining the equivalent confrontation between the United States and Iran, which is very much where we find ourselves today, even within the position of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so we're going to be talking about these world confrontations. It's very apocalyptic, and so we have to keep our seatbelts on tight as we go through this next piece of Gemara. I'm going to take the Gemara up on Daf Yud Amud Aleph 10a, where it becomes wide towards the left, if you're looking at your Vilna Shas type, 3 lines down from where it becomes wide. In fact, it's the first line down where it gets wide towards the right. The first word on that line is, it's actually Sheshai, but it looks like Shishi maybe. I'm going to start a few words from the end of that line where we have the phrase Omer Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Omer Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. We made a quick start on this last week. Again, our Mishnah originally was discussing the situation of a Kohen Gadol who needs to be separated 7 days before Yom Kippur. In doing so, we moved on to talk more generally about the Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, and that took us really into a discussion also of the world powers. There is Bavel that destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. There is Persia that gave us the wherewithal and the backing to build the second Beis HaMikdash. And then there is Rome that destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash. So we have some of the great players on the world great power scene at the time, and those are being discussed. So I'm going to take you to the starting point of Omer Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. So let's go to the Gemara. Omer Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and then we move on to the next line. Omer Rebbe. He said this in the name of Rebbe. Asida Romi shetipol biyad pras. In the future, it'll happen that Rome will fall as an empire to Persia, that Persia will defeat Rome. Shenerma, and now the Gemara quotes the Pasuk. And let's have a look at that Pasuk. I'm going to share screen with you. And then we'll try and understand what it's saying, perhaps in a modern idiom. Modern idiom is more difficult than the Gemara's idiom. Okay, let's just move up. And this is where we are. I should be sharing screens. This is the Pasuk that the Gemara is about to quote. Looking at it in the Gemara itself, and I'll look at it on my screen, but if I just go to the shorthand version in the Gemara says, Shenerma, as the Pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, Lochein shim'u atzas Hashem asher yo'atz al Edom, u'machshvosov asher choshav al yoshvei Temon, im lo yischavum tzeirei hatzon, im lo yoshim alehem nevehem. So that's this first Pasuk over here, which is, I went through this last week with you. It's very badly translated in the Sefaria translation over here, but it may give you some idea. Lochein shimu, says Yirmiyahu, atzas Hashem, what God's device or counsel is, asher yo'atz al Edom, which he has devised against Edom. Edom paralleling Rome. Whenever you see the word Edom, you're talking about Rome. And we'll discuss this correspondence between Edom and Rome, which seems so very wrong when we've looked at this posuk in a bit more detail. But for the moment, understand Edom to mean the Roman Empire. So this is what Hashem has devised against the Roman Empire. Umachshavosov and his thoughts and his intentions, Hashem's intentions, Asher Choshev al Yoshvei Taimon, which is dealing now with Taimon, and we're not interested in Taimon. Imlo Yischavum Tzeirei Hatzon, mysterious psukim, as you can imagine, this is in Navi. Surely if the Tzeirei Hatzon, the young sheep, should not drag them away, in other words, they will drag them away. The young sheep will drag away the Romans. Imlo Yoshim Alehem Nevehim. If, in other words, it will happen that the Tzeirei Hatzon, whoever they are, the young sheep, will destroy the sanctuaries of the Romans. He translates here, as I say, Tzeirei Hatzon as shepherd boys, but that's complete nonsense as far as we're concerned in the verse. And so the verse is insinuating to us that the Tzeirei Hatzon, whoever they are, will eventually destroy Rome. And this is one of the prophecies in Yirmiyahu over here. But who are the Tzeirei Hatzon? At this point, the Gemara is taking for granted, without having yet proven it to us, that the Tzeirei Hatzon are Persia. And therefore, this is a prophecy of the downfall of Rome to Persia. I know it's very subtle. That's the way the Gemara is learning it over here. The Tzeirei Hatzon are the Persians. As we get on a bit further, the Gemara will explain why the Tzeirei Hatzon are the Persians. But if we just look a bit further on the Psukim, we can see what Yirmiyahu means when he says the counsel that God devised against Edom. What is the counsel? What will happen to Rome? This will happen to Rome. Mikol Niflom, at the sound of their downfall, Rasha Oretz, the earth shall shake. Sa'aka b'yam suf nishma kolam. The sound of screaming shall be heard of the Sea of Reeds. This is the sound of screaming of the Edom, or as it falls to the sword of Prus. And it goes on to say, Hine, this is a continuation, Kanesha ya'aleh v'yideh, like an eagle he will fly up. V'yifros kanofof al Botzra, and he, Persia, will spread his wings as a great power over Botzra. Botzra is actually a town in real Edom, which is, as we'll see in a moment on the map, south of Transjordan. In other words, this is part of the prophecy that the Persians will overwhelm the great cities of Edom. And the heart of the mighty warriors of Rome, of Edom, will be on that day, when this happens, like the heart of a woman who is in travail, a heart of a woman who is expecting to deliver, and she's in pain, and she is concerned that she may not survive the delivery of her baby, or her baby may not deliver. She is terrified and trembling. So will be the warriors of Rome. So this is the forecast or the prophecy of Yirmiyahu, which suggests, if you believe Tzeirei Hatzon is Persia, that the Persians eventually will overwhelm the Romans. I'm going to make a little bit of a detour here for a moment. I'm not sure where my detour should start from. Okay, I'll start from this, although to a certain extent, this is the end of the story rather than the beginning of the story. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah about Persia and Rome. We're dealing with these two powers. Why are we only dealing with Persia and Rome? Why aren't we dealing with Babylon? Why aren't we dealing with Greece? What about all the other nasties? Egypt, Assyria. So there's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says this. Ma'ishno hani dechashiva, or ma'ishno hani delo chashiva. Why is it that these two powers, it's talking about Persia and Rome in the section of the Gemara which I've not brought you. How is it that these two are so significant, whereas the other world powers are not so significant, that we're bringing them out and highlighting them? Mishum dahanach moshchi b'malchusayu ado asi mishicha. Because these two world powers will remain in place until the kingship of the Mashiach. As you see over here, Rome and Persia, their kingship extends until the coming of Messiah. And, we're in that sort of era now, so we should not be surprised to see Rome and Persia, in whichever guise they now which remaining to battle it out against each other. And here you have a Tosfos actually to that piece of Gemara in Avodah Zarah, which actually deals with a different opinion than the one we're bringing at the moment, and will bring the opinion, which we will see, that it will be Rome that defeats Persia, and not Persia that defeats Rome. Not like this posuk in Yirmiyahu. So if you're rooting for one of the world powers, you've got it both ways here. Anyway, so let's read what Tosfos says over here. Moshchel Malchusaya to Osi Mashiach, their kingships, their kingdoms, their empires, if you like, Persia and Rome, will continue until the Messiah. For Harda Amrin and Asida Prasha Tipple Biad Romi, and therefore this prophecy that Persia will fall to Rome, which is not the prophecy I brought you in Jeremiah, but the opposite prophecy that Tosfos is referring to. That's Somach Lebias HaMashiach. This will happen very close to Messianic times. Don't forget that the Gemara is bringing this verse and interpreting it 2,000 years ago. And Tosfos is saying 1,000 years later that this will be eventually fulfilled in Mashiach's time. Kida Omrinon, Asida Malchus Romi, Shetifshot al Kol Ha'olah Tisha Chadoshim. We'll come to this very strange period. That at the end of days, to which we are heading quite fast, possibly, the Roman Empire will once again rule over the world for 9 months. Ignore the 9 months, we'll see what posuk that comes from. But the prophecy over here is that of Rome winning out against Persia, rather than Persia winning out against Rome. Our Gemara, to start with, breaking this prophecy of Yirmiyahu, which is the contrary prophecy, we will see how these play out later on. There's a machlokus, as there always is, as to which of these great powers will overwhelm the other. It's a bit like Esav and Yaakov. We have a battle of Yaakov and Esav, and we have Yaakov overpowering Esav, and sometimes Esav overpowers Yaakov, different parts of history. We have another parallel twin here, whereby Rome overpowers Persia, maybe Persia overpowers Rome. At this point, I want to make a little bit of a diversion, because I've told you to take for granted that Edom and Rome are one of the same thing. This is an enormous question on which lots of ink has been spilt. Why and how does the Talmud so unhesitatingly identify Edom with Rome? Let's see where Edom is. Edom is a real country. It's still there now. If you're an Edomite, I mean, you came from that part of the world. It's near us. It's one of our neighbors. And here's an old world map. It's nice seeing an old world map. This is even here the kingdom of Aram. That was to the north of Israel, the 10 tribes. Here's the kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem is over here. The Philistines, Gaza. There we are. There's the Gaza Strip with the front power. Everything here is so topical even today. It really is incredible. So over here, just to the right or to the east of the Dead Sea, is the kingdom of Moab. And to the south of it is Edom. Edom is South Transjordan. So Edom is actually one of our neighbors, one of our brothers, indeed. Who moved to Edom? Esav. Esav built his home, if you like, and his nation state in Edom, which he took over Har Seir. And if you remember, when Bnei Israel came around out of Egypt, they had to circumvent Edom and come in through a roundabout way so that they would not cross into Edom. Edom was Esav's territory. Now, if Edom is a neighbor geographically to Eretz Yisrael and is also Esav's territory, if we think back again to those wonderful family trees that we already saw last week and the week before, relating to Shem, Ham, and Yafes, who their descendant nations were, it's very clear that Edom, if it's Esav, is a brother of Bnei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael are descended from Shem. We're Shemites, we're Semites. Esav is also a Shemite. He's a brother of Yaakov. He can be nothing else. And if he's a Shemite, then Edom is a Shemite country. It is a Shem country. And what about Italy? Rome. Rome, which we don't have on the map over here, is part of the, if you like, the Western Hemisphere, allied with, if you like, in the ancient world, with Greece. It is part of that sphere of influence. There's no doubt that Rome, therefore, Rome is from Yafet. It is part of the Yafet world. So you have the true Edom that we know about being Shem. We have Rome that we also know about, the Italian Rome, as being Yafet. So how is it that Chazal identify Edom with Rome? You would have thought that they are complete antitheses each other. They come through a different fundamental line. So how can we now say that Edom is Rome? Now, this question has been asked for the last 1,000 years and hasn't been answered satisfactorily. It's quite interesting, the question, for one other reason, and that is, if you look through Chazal, through Medrashim, and everywhere, you find that at each time Edom is Rome, it's taking Zeromi, it will say whatever it is, there will never be any explanation, ever, you will find in the oldest sources as to why Chazal considered Edom to be identified with Rome. And it's only when you get to the period of the Rishonim, the Rambam, we're talking about 1,000 years after the Gemara, 1,000 years after it was taken for granted without any machlokas that Edom is identified later with Rome, with the Roman Empire, only 1,000 years later did anyone start scratching their heads and saying, why? Why is Edom identified as Rome? The Abarbanel has huge long commentary on it. The Ramban, Nachmanides also talks about it, as does the Radak. You can imagine all the Parshanot on Tanakh, busy themselves, Ibn Ezra, trying to understand. They give various answers, none of them particularly satisfactory, and some are really quite far-fetched. According to one answer, for example, Edom, perhaps after the Romans were in place, they moved the population at an early time of the Hasmoneans out of the country, and they transported them on boats to Rome, and then they, so to speak, took over the country. Well, that's highly far-fetched, in which case Edom becomes Rome, because it's essentially been displaced to Rome. But that's highly unlikely. Another explanation that's given, which is more of a historical connection, but not really an explanation, is that, as we know, towards the end of the Hasmonean period, when the Hasmonean kings argued, essentially the Romans were brought in. The Romans became the governors of Eretz Yisrael, and who became their favorite, Antipater and Horus, Herod. Herod was an Idumean. Now, towards the end of the Hasmonean dynasty, Edom had been invaded by the Hasmonean kings, and they forcibly converted, and this is a very, very bad piece of news, the Idumeans, if you like, as they were called, into Jews. So they became Jews. No one knows how loyal they were as Jews, but Herod was one of those, maybe a second generationer, who had been part of the converted line. And therefore he was able to become, so to speak, the king of Israel. Now, Herod was a great favorite with the Romans. So somehow Herod, because he was an Idumean, got identified, so to speak, himself and Idumeans with Rome. Again, very far-fetched, really, that should be the case. We should be looking to something much more substantial than the identification of one ruler from Edom with Rome to cause this equivalence between Rome and Edom. That doesn't seem to be hard enough evidence. So that doesn't really work very well either. There's another interesting fact, by the way, and maybe the map shows it, I'm not quite sure. The scholars say that Edom, which is really Transjordan, it's south of Moab, if you like, it sort of overlaps a bit with a bit of Saudi Arabia and Jordan and modern Israel today. During the later period, during the Hasmonean period, the Edomians moved. They were originally, if you like, in this tract of land, and then they moved left. And therefore, parts of Beersheba and a lot of the Negev became Idumean, which means that Edom is not just what you think to the right of Eretz Yisrael, but also covers some of the lower part of Eretz Yisrael and the Negev today. But that doesn't help explain in any way. I mean, this movement of Edom has nothing to do with why Edom should be identified with Rome. So all the answers given so far make no sense whatsoever. The only answer you might be able to assign to this question, which is also not satisfactory, but it essentially means that we don't really know, so let's leave it at that, is that in some mystical sense, even though there isn't a, if you like, a genetic descendant line between later Roman Empire and the early Idumean and Edomian kingdoms, which are much older. Edom was around at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Even though the two are not genetically, if you like, associated, Rome and Edom are not genetically associated, and according to Parashas Noach, one is from Shem and one is from Yefes. Nevertheless, there was some mystical occurrence in which the, if you like, the personality, the soul, the nation-state identity of Edom was somehow mysteriously transferred, supernaturally transferred to Rome. That Rome, so to speak, took over whatever sorrow, whatever angelic protection that Edom had. It took it over. And that's not a scientific answer. But since all the scientific answers don't work, I find it easier looking at that, because the Chazal assumed without a shadow of doubt that the Roman world at the time was the continuation of Edom. And there must have been some cause for them to say that. Okay, so let's leave it as that. Edom equals Rome for whatever mysterious reason that we don't know. So let's get back to the Gemara. The Gemara was talking here about the Seirei Hatson and saying that Seirei Hatson on this version, the Babylonian version, the Persians are the ones who, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. The Persians are the Seirei Hatson, for the reason we'll see in a moment, and they will overwhelm and defeat at the end of days Rome. As I say today, Rome is also not taken just as Rome anymore. If you imagine, Edom has metamorphized more than once. Edom metamorphizes into Rome. Rome is here, we're talking about Rome pre-Christian. Rome metamorphizes in the eyes of Chazal and of the Rishonim to the Christian world, as opposed to the Islamic world. And that's another metamorphosis, because it isn't just Rome that became Christian, even though maybe the chair of the Catholic world is in Rome. We're talking about the general Christian ideal and the Western world. That would include, all of Europe. It would include North America, essentially as well. And that's why I say America is the ultimate, if you like, incarnation, if you want to call it that, of Edom. Because going through these metamorphoses, that's where it lands today in terms of the world power that has the characteristics of Edom. Okay, it's all very confusing, this, but nevertheless, let's see how the Gemara works. The Gemara is now going to try and explain itself that Seirei Hatson is Persia, because I've left that unproven so far. The Persians will overwhelm the Romans, because the Persians are referred to in this posuk in Yirmiyahu as Seirei Hatson. So the Gemara now goes on to say, Maskif la Rabba Barula. Rabba Barula asked the following question: My mashata hait Seirei Hatson prasu. What makes you think that the Seirei Hatson, these young sheep, if you like, Seir is someone who's young, Hatson, sheep, the young ones of the flock, mysterious phrase, should be identified with Persia. Dichsiv, and he gives a possible source from this, and this is from Daniel, because Daniel is, we just finished doing Daniel. If you've gone through the OU program of Tanakh, Daniel has just come to an end and Ezra is just about starting. But if you understand Daniel with all the commentary, then you're doing very well. It's a very messianic and eschatological book. It talks about the end of days. It talks about the great empires, but it doesn't give them names. It talks about animals, the feet of lead and lion heads and angels' wings and everything else. So one of the visions of Daniel over here is, or the Pasuk writes, Ha'ayil asher ro'isa bal ha'kronayim. And it goes on to say the Pasuk, Malchei Modai Ufras. So because the Pasuk says the isle, the ram, if you like, which you saw, which had two horns, and that means Malchei Modai Pras. There, Daniel does say what it is. So maybe you want to say this is how we know that Seirei Hatson are Pras. How? Because the Tzeiri Hatzon, the flock, here uses the word ayil, which is really a type of tzon. So the tzon here, the ayil in this posuk in the vision of Daniel, is interpreted by him to be the kings of Modai Pras. Modai Pras always come together very often, although they started off as two separate empires. They really essentially coalesced into the Persian Empire. So you have over here some sort of remez, some sort of indication, some sort of hint that a sheep-like creature is to be identified with Pras. And that might explain why the assumption was made that the Tzeiri Hatzon refers to Pras as a result of this posuk. But says the Gemara, essentially Rabbi Baruch, says that's not good enough for me. That particular semi-proof isn't good because the Amar, I would say to you that the posuk that there's another posuk there that follows that you could interpret it to be Greece and not Pras, not Persia. Maybe it's Yovam, because it says there, Safir Hasoir Melech Yovam. That Safir, the young animal, the young goat, or whatever, is the king of Greece. So you have another sheep-like animal, and it's being interpreted by Daniel there as being Greece. So how can we be so certain that in the vision of Yirmiyahu, where the Tzeiri Hatzon defeat Edom, that Tzeiri Hatzon is Persia? Maybe it is Greece. That's his question. Identify the correct empire. So now the Gemara actually brings you the resolution of how we know it's Persia rather than Greece. Kistolik Rav Chaviva bar Surmaki. So the Gemara says when Rav Chaviva bar Surmaki, when it says Kistolik, he went up. Every time you have this going up, when someone went up, and it doesn't say any more, the Gemara means that one of the Talmidei Chachamim in Bovel, went up to Eretz Yisrael, Aliyah la'aretz, and there was this mobility between scholars coming down and coming up. And that was the cross-fertilization of Babylonian and Eretz Yisrael scholars. So when Rav Chaviva bar Surmaki, who was in Bovel, went up into Eretz Yisrael, he brought this question into identifying Tzeiri Hatzon before the sages in Eretz Yisrael. So he came Kamei Tahahu Amra Kamei Tahu Birabolam. He said this statement and this question that had been asked. What is the correct identity? Well, the real identity of Tzeiri Hatzon, please stand up for us so we know who it is. Is it Greece or is it Persia? So Amalei, the sage in Eretz Yisrael, said to Rav Chaviva to respond to him. He said, what's the problem? Man de lo yoda perushe kroi mosif tiyufta le Rebbe. Rebbe was the one who made the statement earlier on, took for granted that Tzeiri Hatzon was Persia. And this scholar in Eretz Yisrael is now saying, how can anyone even question what Rebbe said, that it was Persia? I'll prove to you in a moment that it's obviously referring to Persia. Whoever has this question, he says rather impolitely, this scholar in Israel, Man de lo yada perishi kroi. Somebody doesn't even understand the translation of verses. He thinks he's found a question, a query in Rebbe's statement that it was Persia. Nonsense. Even a school child can tell you that this must be Persia and it cannot be Greece. Why? And because he gives a different interpretation to Tzeiri Hatzon. We were looking for animals, weren't we? We were looking to Ayil, we were looking to Safir, etc., and Sa'ir, and goats, and things like that, and saying, well, the Tzeiri Hatzon is referring to some sort of animal over here. Says the respondent in Eretz Yisrael says, when it says Tzeiri Hatzon, it means, translating it into Aramaic, although he's just an idiomatic translation, Zutrat Achawi, the youngest of the brothers. And that is the Persians. The Persians are the youngest of brothers. I'll explain why in a moment, why the Persians are the youngest of the brothers. But the way he's translating Tzeiri Hatzon, Tzeir means young. So in Aramaic, Zutra means young. I called it the young sheep. So it's referring to something or someone young. But he said the tzon is not referring here to sheep. Don't look for animal metaphors to try and identify it. Son is referring to, when you talk about sheep, you're talking about the family as being a sheep. You know, we're all part of one flock, if you like. We talk about it. We talk about the Jewish people being lambs or whatever it is, or sheep. Or we talk about sometimes following someone, you know, without any questions as being like a sheep. It's an idiom that can sometimes be used to describe people and their frame of mind and their identity with each other. So Seiri Hatzon means the youngest of the brothers. Well, what has that got to do with Persia, you may ask? And I can only answer the question by sharing with you a screen. The Gemara went over to see the Tony Rab Yosef, just do the next few words. Rab Yosef taught Tiros Zer Pras, that the name Tiros in the Psukim relating to Noah's sons refers to Pras, refers to Persia. This is a verse I brought down for you. I think it was last week. Let me go back again and share. Yeah. And we're going to go back to an earlier verse, fundamental verse that we did in Noah. Look at all these lovely maps you get. So you get geography lessons, history lessons, and everything, and all for the same price. Okay, so this was the Posuk in Noah. B'nai Yefes, who were the sons of Yefes? Yefes being the son of Noah. Gomer, Umagog. We had to try and explain what they all were on the map. We got into a terrible muddle on this because we don't know what Gomer and Magog really are, but we tried by showing you who they might be on this old world map. Gomer, Umagog, Umadai, Medes, Yovan, Greece. You can see those here. Those are the ones you can straight away mark up. But Sival, Umeshach, the Siros. Now, the Chazal take Siros, as being Persia. If you accept that, have you noticed that Siros is at the end of this list of sons? So, the understanding over here, you could say it's a bit of a tall guess, is that since these names are mentioned in this order, they're mentioned with the oldest first and the youngest last. In other words, the youngest descendant of Yefes was Tiros, and Tiros represents the foundation of the Persian Empire. QED, therefore, Seiri Hatzon, meaning the youngest of the brothers, means the youngest of this lot, who were brothers, Gomeg, Magog, Madai, Yovan, etc. Who was the youngest of those brothers? Tiros. And that's the meaning of the Posuk in Yirmiyahu, when Yirmiyahu, to this explanation, that's another Posuk, sorry, all sorts of lovely Psukim here, where he said that Edom would be overwhelmed by the Seiri Hatzon, he means Persia, because Seiri Hatzon refer to the youngest descendant of the original forefather, which is Yefes. And the youngest of the brothers was Tiros, who is identified with Pras. And there you are. We understand why we should say that Edom will be defeated by Persia and not by Greece. Yeah. Okay. So that takes us to understanding the choice of opponent over here, that it is Pras that overwhelms. Pras will overwhelm. I'm going to stop sharing. Pras will overwhelm Rome, or the Western world, if you wish to look at it today in terms of our end of days. So let's go on. The Gemara now says, We're not finished on this topic yet at all, as to who's top dog here at the end of days. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. Rabbi Baba Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, Asida Romi Shetipol Biyad Pras, that Rome will fall to Pras, Kal V'chomer. He agrees with the previous opinion, which also stated that Rome would fall to Persia. But he's not going to be using this verse. We use this verse, the verse in Jeremiah, and we said, well, Pras, the Seiri Hatzon, and the Seiri Hatzon would destroy Edom. So essentially, we brought, if you like, a semi-biblical proof that at the end of days, Pras would defeat Romi. But in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eloi, the Gemara is going to bring a logical proof for it, which is a bit strange. but we'll see how it works out. Let's read it first and then try to understand it. It doesn't read very easily. Asida Romisha Tipol Biapros, Rome will eventually fall to the hands of the Persians. Kal v'chomer, it has to be because of a kal v'chomer. It is a logical consequence which falls very clearly to us to interpret. What's the kal v'chomer? Uma mikdash rishon, if we remember that the first temple, shebena'uhu libnei Shem, that was built by the Bnei Shem. What does that mean? It means the Jewish people themselves built the first temple. It wasn't as a result of the express order of the king of Persia. The Jews, Shlomo and David HaMelech, they had an autonomous regime, and they built the first temple. So it was a glorious temple that was built by the Jewish people. And nevertheless, Mibnei Shem, Vehacharivu Kastim, and the Kastim, which means the Babylonians, Kastim and Babylonians are one and the same, destroyed it. But the destroyers of the first temple, Noflu, Kastim, Biyad Parsium, the Persians eventually took over the Babylonian Empire. And when they took it over, then Mikdash Sheni Shabanu Parsim, the Parsim did another tova for us. They built the second temple. What that means is that they enabled the building of the second temple under Ezra, etc., Nehemiah. So since they provided us with that favor and that assistance, then came the Romans, those nasty people, and they destroyed the second temple. Isn't it obvious that God isn't going to allow the Romans to beat the Persians, but rather the Persians will beat the Romans? What he's saying over here is, if you look at who the good boys are and who the bad boys are, we've got Persia and we've got Rome. And looking at them in the context of the first two Botei Mikdash, not looking at them in the year 2023, it's clear, says Rabbi Eloi, who the good boys are and who the bad boys are. Let's look at what Pras has as an accomplishment, and let's see what Rome has an accomplishment. Well, Pras has an accomplishment that it did two things. It defeated the Babylonians, who destroyed our temple, and that's a good thing in itself. It's destroyed those that destroyed us, and it went on and enabled us to rebuild the second Beis HaMikdash. Two positive marks for Persia. Whereas what the Romans got to offer? The destruction of the second temple. One negative mark, two positive marks for Persia, one negative mark for Rome. So if you were going to say, if God in his wisdom is going to choose which empire should be dominant towards the end, would he not choose the good boys rather than the bad boys? Isn't it like a cowboy movie over here, the cowboys and the Indians? I'm not sure that's politically correct anymore to put it in that sense, but you have the Romans who are overwhelmingly evil compared to the Persians in terms of what the Persians have provided, the benefits they provided for the Jewish people. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi is saying something interesting over. He says, I don't care what psukim you give me. I look to see what would be just in God's mind. It's a big leap, isn't it? And in God's mind, the consideration of the good that the Persians have bestowed on us must outweigh the harm that the Romans have done to us. So who will he allow to be triumphant at the end? The good over the bad, like every good Western movie. It's always the goodie who wins over the baddie. That's the way people who come to the cinema want to watch it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is delivering a just world, and that will be justice. This is the reason given by Rabbi Bar Chana that the Persians, in fact, will come out on top and destroy the Romans. Not a verse, but a kal v'chomer, a logical argument. However, now we come to the opposition. You may not be too pleased with the Persians defeating the Romans, because in our idiom, it means the Iranians will win the final battle days, the Gog and Magog battle, or whatever it is that faces us, over the Western world. Because if we've moved our idiom from Persia to Iran and from Rome to the Western world, and particularly the United States, something that we don't look forward to, which is Iran triumphant over the Western world. So now we will have something that will put us a little bit more at ease. Amar Rav, said Rav, Asida porashetipol biadromi. I tell you, you've got it entirely wrong. This one now is like the Tosis we learned earlier on. Persia will eventually fall to Rome. In other words, you might say Iran will fall to the United States. How do I know that? So Omru le Rav Kana Rav Asila Rav. Rav only made the statement and he hasn't defended himself. So the Gemara says Rav Kana and Rav Asi, who were colleagues of Rav who had made this statement, they said to him, is that logical? Where do you get this from? And they go on to say, Beno ye biyad store, very short statement. It means the builders should lose to the destroyers. Taking the previous argument we made to heart over here, we know that the Persians were the builders. They built the Second Temple in some way, and the Romans were the destroyers of the Second Temple. Do you really feel that it's possible that the builders, the Persians, will fall to the destroyers of the Second Temple, rather than the builders will come out triumphant? Is that a world of fairness? So Amalahu. So Rav responded, interestingly enough, he defends his case that the Romans will defeat the Persians, or the United States will defeat Iran. Why? He says, yes, I hold that to be the case, but he doesn't give a reason. He says this, very interesting, Gezeras Melech. It's unusual, actually, that any discussion of this sort, a Gaddic discussion over who is and who should and who shouldn't, ends up with a statement which is totally unexplained. It is the decree of the king. How does Rav know it's the decree of the king? Did Hashem communicate with Rav, the scholar, to say that I decree that Rome will defeat Persia? And yet he says this is the decree of the king. If he had a reason for it, if he had his posuk, or he had his argument, wouldn't he have said so? And if he doesn't have an argument, and that's why he didn't say so, how does he know what's in God's mind? Gezeras Melachi, that's what I know is in God's mind, he says. Very, very strange. But the Gemara brings an Ikad Omri, which helps a bit. This Ikad Omri is another version of what Rav said. Did he just say that it is the decree of the king and nothing else? And I happen to have God's, I happen to know what's in God's intentions right now. This Ikad Omri says a little bit more expansively. Amala, who he said to them, who asked him, how should it be, how could it be that the destroyers will be triumphant over the builders, that Rome will defeat Persia? Inhu nami ha kososri be kanishta. Interesting. He says, why are you, according to this version, why are you so defensive on behalf of the Persians? You're saying the Persians built the second Beis HaMikdash, and the Romans destroyed it. I don't deny those facts, but the Persians also did us a lot of harm. And he says this, Inhu nami ha kostori be knishta. They also destroyed many of our bote kanesiot, many of our shuls. So here we have Rav, according to this view, Rav lives around the year 150, 200 of the Common Era. He's in Bovel. He's the most powerful Torah figure in Bovel, the head of the yeshiva in Surah, which was the great yeshiva that lasted many hundreds of years. And he's living essentially in a Babylonian, sort of semi-Babylonian Persian culture, because the culture might have been quite similar where they were. And clearly, there was a lot of discrimination against Jews there, and there had been previously, to the extent that many, if you like, of the shuls had been ambushed, attacked, destroyed, and there had been many edicts against the Jews, even where he was. He was not prepared to be generous to the Persians simply because of this argument. Well, the Persians built the second Beis HaMikdash, and the Romans destroyed it. Well, Rav would say there's a lot of water that's passed under the bridge since then, right? There's another 100 years, 130 years, and we've had a really hard time from them since then. So I still believe that the Persians will lose to the Romans. And Tanya Nami Hachi, the Gemara actually brings a brisa which fits in with Rav. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to take it. Which fits in with Rav. And the brisa, which is Tanaitic, which could have been brought earlier on, it might have been useful for it to come earlier on. Okay, the Gemara said, the brisa is this: Asida pras shetipol biad Romi. This is essentially like Rav. Persia will fall to the hands of Rome, just like this second opinion. Chada, first, for this reason, the Sosri Bei Knishta, because they have been destroying our shuls more recently, despite their virtues of the Persians, that they built the second Beis HaMikdash. And V'od, and furthermore, Gezeres Melachu Sheyiplu Bonin Biyad Sostrin. This is the other argument we had from Rav, which is a more mysterious one, a more mystical one. It is a Gezeres Melach. In other words, there's a combination of reasons that Persia will fall to the Romans. And why is he saying this, really? The Bryce is saying this because there's a very powerful argument to be made, as we said before, that the contrary should be the case, that the Romans should fall to the Persians. The Romans did terrible things in destroying the second Beis HaMikdash and the Golis, etc., that we're still in. The Persians actually destroyed the first destroyers of the first Beis HaMikdash. They built the second Beis HaMikdash and aided in that as well. So they're the heroes. So how can you say that the destroyers should fall in the hand of the heroes? So in order to counter that, we need a double reason. One reason is that they're not such heroes. The Persians are not really such heroes after all, but that may not have been enough to have justified the Persians losing to the Romans. The other one is Gezeras Melech, as if to say that we know somehow, mystical reasons, through a baskol, through a divine voice, or whatever it is, that God's eventual edict will be for Rome to be triumphant over Persia. And that itself is a very powerful reason for us to hold that to be the case. And we don't need to know why. If it's a Gezeras Melech, we don't need to look for a reason. If God would tell us the reason, then that would be fine. But otherwise, we leave it. It's a bit like something being a chok. It's a statute. We don't know why God instructed us, not to mix wool and linen together in shatnez. Seems a bit of a strange halacha, but it's there, and it's Gezeras Melechu. And the same way, the destroyers, the builders falling to the destroyers is a Gezeres Melech. There's a little bit of an argument in that they're not such heroes as well, but ultimately God's decree has been made that this would be the case. Okay, all right, good. That was the brisa. So at this point we have got, there are two possible positions to take. The first position, which is a position perhaps we don't like so much, is that Persia will be triumphant over Rome, or Iran over America. The second position, which we've just seen now, is that Rome will be triumphant over Persia, or if you like, the Western world over Iran, over the Islamic world, or whatever, however you wish to widen the interpretation of Persia today, because it may be more expansive than simply Persia. It may wish to expand it to the Arab world more generally. Okay, the Gemara is going to bring another related statement over here, which we will see will help to explain a verse. So Omar, the Gemara says, Rav Yehuda Omar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, it's connected. Ein ben David ba ad shetifshot malchus Romi harishah b'chol ha'olam kulo Tisha Chadoshim. This is I think Tosas brought this to back up the idea that it would be Rome that wins eventually, America that wins over Iran. What does the Gemara say over here? Ein ben David ba, the son of David means the Mashiach. The Mashiach will not come ad shetifshot malchus Romi harishah, by the way, until the wicked kingdom of Rome spreads and takes possession, b'chol ha'olam kulo, in other words, becomes the leading world power. When they become, have I lost you? Do you hear me? I probably lost.
Yeah, you're back. You're
I'm
back.
back. Okay, I always lose around this time. The Mashiach will not come until Rome has become the leading colonial power. That's what this statement makes. And we're talking about Mashiach's times. We're not now talking about the Romans during the period of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. This is a forward prophecy, and it will be so for at least 9 months, whatever that means, during the time of Yemos HaMashiach. How do we know that? Because the Pasuk says, and this is a Pasuk in Micha, I'll just share my screen. The Pasuk in Micha. Here. Lo yitneim ad eis yoleda, yoloda v'yesa echav yeshuvun al b'nei Yisrael. I don't really know what this Pasuk's even talking about. It's a prophecy in Micha. So the way you translate it over here, truly God will leave them helpless until she who is to bear has born. Then the rest of his kindred shall return to the children of Israel. The idea over here, I mean, it's the Asio Ladar, which is interpreted being as 9 months, which means God will allow Edom to remain in full power over the world, if you like, for ad Asio Ladar, for the period of pregnancy of a woman until full term, 9 months. And only after that will there be a complete, if you like, Yeshuvah al Bnei Yisrael. Will there be a complete resettlement of Eretz Yisrael, and Messianic times will start in earnest? Very difficult to interpret these psukim, are they before or after or during Messianic times? But this is being interpreted as backing the idea that that Edom will be on top at the end of days and be completely in control for a 9-month period. And to us, what does that mean? I don't know. Okay, now that's actually the end of this sugya, and I might actually stop the share over here, because then we can really come back to the Beis Hamikdash and the various chambers in the Beis Hamikdash. Let me quit sharing 1 second. So what have we got over here? The Gemara has taken us through the history of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, the rebuilding of the second, the sins for which the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the second Beis Hamikdash destroyed, the empires that built and destroyed the Babylonians, and then the Persians who allowed us to rebuild, the Romans who destroyed, and now to this sort of end of days prophecy, which we looked at today, in which we came to 2 opinions, really. One, that eventually the Roman Empire or its descendants, or its those powers which could be identified with Rome today, versus the powers that might be identified with Prus, with Persia today. Which one of those will be triumphant? Only the future will see, I suppose. Please God, we shouldn't see it too quickly. We don't want this great big battle happening too soon. I hope we can finish Shas at least a few times before we get to that point in time. So I'm going to quit sharing, and I'm going to quit recording.